I really, really believe that storytelling is going to be one of the last skills that can be disrupted by machines. Because at its core, storytelling is humans. It's not just about technique. And that is a very critical skill that I believe is one that we all have to learn. It goes way beyond communication. Whatever your role in life is, whatever you do, whatever you want to do, I really believe that being able to tell powerful stories can help you get what you want.
Welcome to the Persuader podcast. Thanks, Adeline, for your powerful insights on storytelling and persuasion. I'm sure our viewers will find these insights very, very powerful. Thanks a lot. Welcome, Adeline Ng.
Thank you so much, Manish. I'm so thrilled to be here with you and your audience today.
Great. No, thanks for making the time. So let me just jump into my first question. What's the secret of your storytelling due to which you've won so many awards?
So one thing I would say, my belief is at its core, good storytelling is something that connects us as human. And in fact, not just connects us, but reminds us that we are human. And especially in this age of disruption, to be human and to feel connected to other humans, that to me is the real power of storytelling. And I would say, good stories, they really have three elements, and it's logos, ethos, and pathos. I think many of us have heard that. So let me break down what these three things mean and how I use them in my stories. So the first one is logos, logic, right? So logic, reason, I think many of us, especially if we come from the business world, we're very familiar with using logic and reasoning. And as a storyteller, I want to make sure that my story is something that is logical so that my audience says, oh, I can see how that situation really arose. I don't want them to be questioning the basis of the story. The second is pathos. And pathos comes from credibility as a speaker. So why am I credible to speak about this topic? Now, not all of us have climbed Mount Everest, all of us have gone to Olympics. But when we tell a story, there's a reason why we can tell that story. Very often it's because we've experienced it ourselves. I try and pick stories for which I've learned a lesson that I have applied in my own life and that I now want to share with my audience. So let me give you an example. All my life, people always say, oh, you must be grateful, show gratitude and all that. And I heard it, right? But it never really made an impression on me. It never really told me what gratitude really, really means until this time in a yoga studio when the yoga teacher wanted us to do the chair pose. Those of us who do yoga, you're familiar, the chair pose, you put your hands up like that, right? And this time, instead of asking us to hold that pose for a normal 10 seconds or so, he said, we're going to hold it for 3 minutes. And I was like, 3 minutes, my thighs were burning. I was not a happy yoga person at all, right? And then he asked the most profound question. He said, who would be grateful to be in your chair right now? First thought, no one. No one's grateful to be in this really hot studio in this very uncomfortable position. But he asked it again, who would be grateful to be in your chair right now? And the answer that came to mind was my sister-in-law. Because at that time, my sister-in-law was in the final stages of her fight with leukemia. And she was so weak that she couldn't even sit up in her chair. And in fact, she was so weak that she couldn't even carry her own baby son. And so at the time of this story, how grateful would she be to be in that yoga chair, in that uncomfortable yoga chair, to feel that pain that for me I didn't want, but for her, she would welcome it so much. And that was the moment in my life that I really understood. Gratitude is not gratitude for the easy things, the good things in life. It's easy for all of us to feel that. But gratitude is gratitude when things are tough. Gratitude for the lessons that life gives us. And so for me, being able to talk about gratitude from that position of credibility, of authority, of something I went through in my life that changed my life, that is what, as a speaker, we can bring the pathos to. And then the third one is ethos. Ethos is emotion. How, as a speaker, can I evoke human emotions in my audience. A good speaker will bring out emotions that all of us experience as humans. And these includes emotions like sadness, happiness, fear, surprise, love, and in fact, the best stories are the ones that combine opposing emotions. So, another one of my stories is about a time that my mother and I went hiking in a forest in Canada and we met a bear. And we were very, very afraid. But also in that story was love around, do I defend myself? Do I run away? Because I'm younger, I can run faster. Or do I stay behind and sacrifice myself for my mom, who's older and can't run as fast? And more importantly, what would my mom do for me? And I think anyone who's a parent, who's a child, you feel that emotion of love, and not just the emotion of fear, but also the emotion of love. And so good stories bring out multiple emotions, typically in very short order, sometimes even at the same time. So yeah, Manish, to sum up, good stories, three parts. They bring out the logic, the logos, the reality of it. The second part, they bring out the pathos, the credibility and passion of the speaker for what they're speaking about. And third, the ethos. They bring out emotions, evoke these amazing emotions in the audience.
Great tips, credibility, emotions, and of course, logic. Uh, so I also want to understand a bit more about this great story I heard you telling, and you've won many awards for it. And it all started with a remark your mom made when you were growing up in Singapore. Can you tell a bit more about that story and why is it so memorable?
So my mom features in a lot of my stories. And I think the reason why is as I've become a mother myself, I now realize that mom was not just nagging me. She was actually imparting values to me through the stories that she was telling me. And one of another story that I learned from my mom that is a story I want to impart to my own two young daughters. Is actually a story about hope. And the title of the speech was called Bloom. So a brief background on this story was that growing up in Singapore, my mom always treated my brother and myself very differently. My brother was the guy who failed school. Okay, he was always getting calls from the principal, not for the good reasons. And I was the opposite. I was the one who was getting good calls, the kinds of calls that parents wanted. But what got me really upset as a young child was that my mom seemed to reward my brother for his bad behavior. So when he was 16, he actually flunked out of secondary school here in Singapore, high school. And my mom then decided that, okay, since you can't make it in school in Singapore, we're going to send you to Australia, which for most people say that is a reward, right? So why are we rewarding him for his bad behavior? And it got me really, really upset at the time, as you can imagine. But my mom would always say this thing. She always said, flowers bloom at different times. Flowers bloom at different times. So she said, don't compare yourself to your brother. You are blooming early in life. You do well in school and you get all these awards. His time to bloom is not yet. He will bloom later. And she kept nurturing him. In fact, she to me is the master gardener, and many of us parents, we are gardeners. We're taking care of these buds that we've been entrusted, which are our kids, or if you're a teacher, our students' lives, right? And she kept nurturing him. And it was amazing because when he went to Australia, he then turned around the environment. And from there, he went on not just to finish his bachelor's degree, he went on to do a master's degree. And in the end, he did a PhD from MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which is one of the top schools in the world. So it really was his time to bloom differently. And a really interesting aside was just as he was blooming, I was on the opposite. So in our 20s, I would say he was doing a lot of amazing things and I was struggling to find my way. And my mom's message then, a message of hope, right? Don't feel that, you have bloomed and you can't bloom again. So flowers can bloom again. Look for your next chance to bloom. So that whole message of we all bloom at different times. Don't judge yourself by other people who seem to have more success at this time because it's just not your time to bloom. It's just not your right place to bloom. So that's one advice that my mom gave me that became a story.
That's very inspirational. When you talk about blooming, it also reminds me of this story where you talk about a broom. It's a funny story, but I thought it was very, very inspirational. You got a standing ovation, and again, you won the Best Speaker award. Uh, can you tell a little bit more about the why do you think that story became so memorable?
Um, so that story was a story about me growing up. So a lot of my stories actually come with a transformation in terms of how I changed my thinking. And one big thing that really overshadowed my life growing up in Singapore, I was a fat girl. And in Singapore, as in many Asian countries, you know, when you're fat, you are told certain things. And one of the things that I was told, not just by my mom and my dad, but also people around, our aunts, uncles, teachers, friends, was, hey, you're fat. No one's ever going to like you. You're never going to find love. You're never going to find a boyfriend. You're never going to get married. You're not going to have kids. And when you're so young, you just believe everything that people tell you, right? So I really believe that all the way through my teens, through my 20s, because, and I just accepted it. That's just the way it is, you know? I look a certain way and therefore I'm not worthy of love. And in my speech, I use this analogy of a broom and how it comes up. As I said, one of a teenage friend told me in Singapore, boys only go for two things with girls. One, they look for a girl that is not fat, cannot be fat, okay? And the second thing, must have long hair. So then I said, what? Boys want to date girls that look like upside down brooms? But later on, the boys, as they grew older, the pool of women, not so many upside down brooms anymore, right? So now they have to go for the skinny girls with short hair. So what we call toilet brush. So that was later on. And then even later, they would just give up dating, right? You cannot date the upside down broom, upside down mop. You cannot date the toilet brush, then you just give up. But what changed my life was when I grew older and I had more exposure to different cultures. And one thing I realized was that people from different cultures, especially outside Asia, don't have this thing around size, and especially the US. And I moved to the US when I was in my early 30s. And it was just crazy because there, men went for all kinds of mops and brooms and toilet brushes. And I described it as some of them, even like the ones that are a little bit rounded at the bottom, like a toilet plunger, which luckily for me, that's more of what I am. And that's where I found my husband, and we got married, and now we have two lovely kids. So yes, that's the story. And the message of that story is, for many of us, it's not so much about whether you've been experienced being a fat girl or fat kid in Asia, but many of us, we hear people around us saying, how can you do that? How can you ever get married? How can you ever be rich? How can you ever be successful? And that becomes our belief, our self beliefs. But what if you change that question? And instead of saying, how can I, right? Why don't you change it to how I can? So for me, the turning point was changing that question, how can I ever find a boyfriend and get married? To how I can find a boyfriend and get married. When you ask yourself how I can make it happen, the solutions come to you and then you make it happen. So that's the story, Manish, that you saw.
Great, great. No, thanks for sharing, and thanks for just exposing your vulnerable side. And I think that's why that story is so powerful and is able to relate to so many people, I think. The next question I want to ask you, Adeline, is, I mean, you have trained as a lawyer, you worked as a lawyer, and then you moved onto the business side, the strategy side of things. You worked for McKinsey, you studied in Harvard. So, how did these experiences as a lawyer and working for McKinsey shape you? What did you learn about storytelling in terms of frameworks or some really strategies in terms of engaging with people and persuading them?
So looking back at my life, I've now been working for about over 25 years in all different environments. I've been very blessed to work with great leaders. And one thing that the great leaders have in common is they're great at telling stories. And all the way from the time when I was in school, our school principal, Mrs. Huang, she was the most amazing storyteller. And we used to love listening to her stories because she could tell stories for 3 hours. Later on, what I realized was it wasn't just fun stories. What she was doing was she was imparting values to us. So, for example, she told us a story this time of how the teachers in the school stayed overnight. They slept in the school hall on the hard floor overnight, just so that they could put up decorations for Chinese New Year, so that when us students came in school in the morning, we would see this beautifully decorated school hall, right? And the real story she was telling us was about service, about the privilege of being in a position of service as a teacher, as a leader. And how do you do all these things that make the lives of the people that you serve, whether it's your students, your employees? How do you do something that help them feel loved, help them feel special? And that was a huge lesson that she told us. Later on, when I was a lawyer, I was very, very privileged to work under Chief Justice Yong Pang Hao, who was the Chief Justice of Singapore. And he too was an amazing storyteller. He would get us all these young lawyers, go to lunch for about 2 hours, and he would tell us endless stories from his life. And again, he was imparting values to us. And so instead of just telling us, do it this way, think A, B, C, D, which would be a very business way of telling it, he would take us along on the journey, put us into that position, take us along his whole thought process, and show us how he arrived at that. And that way we learned his way of thinking, we learned his value system that he was applying to it. And to me, there was so much more value in that than getting a bullet point memo with this is how to do it. And then later on in McKinsey, I think that McKinsey was probably my first formal exposure to storytelling. So McKinsey is a management consulting firm. And one thing that as a consultant you want to do is you want to persuade, right? And the topic of this podcast is using stories to persuade. And one tool that I learned at that time, this was a good 20 years ago now, was Barbara Minto's pyramid principle. I think anyone who's been a consultant will be quite familiar with that. And she teaches two ways of structuring your communication as a pyramid, right? As a pyramid. So the first way is the top-down way. So the top-down way is you tell your key point to your client, which is the conclusion, and then you support it with 2 or 3 supporting facts, right? And for a business person, that's normally how we talk. But that's not always a very powerful way to persuade people. The more powerful way is actually the bottom-up way of bringing them up the pyramid. And the way you do it is you put someone in the scene, in the scenario, at every juncture, you give them a decision to make. So, okay, you have these facts. Do you choose A or do you choose B? And then your audience thinks about it and they come back, oh, okay, let's think about, okay, let's choose A. Okay, now let's go down A. Okay, then you do this. Now you're at the next juncture. Do you choose C or do you choose D? And you take the audience along again. And at every point, you want to flesh it out. So if you choose C, what do you think is the impact on the people around you? If you choose D, what do you think is the impact on the financials? You bring them along on the journey, right? But it takes a longer time, but at the end of it, the audience is completely bought in because they help to co-create that story with you. And so that form of storytelling in business is a wonderful, wonderful way to persuade someone when they're not quite there yet. So highly recommend to anyone who's interested in looking up different ways of storytelling in business, Barbara Minto's pyramid principle.
Great. Now, very insightful. What I heard you saying was give your listeners options, and that's how you engage them. So the other thing which I wanted to check with you, Adeline, was that you're now working with many CEOs, also advising SMEs in Singapore. So how do you advise leaders in terms of using stories to persuade their employees to take a specific action which they desire out of them?
I think storytelling is an amazing tool that all leaders can have in your toolkit, right? And one thing I would say is that I would advise all leaders to have a few types of stories that are always available at your fingertips. The first type of story is what we call the origin story or the founder story. In my case, my husband and I founded this business. And many people ask, how did you come up with doing this business? It's a business dealing with trauma therapy. And that's where we tell my husband's story, how he went through childhood trauma. He grew up in the US, and unfortunately in the US, many children suffer childhood trauma in all kinds of forms. There's physical abuse, there's mental abuse, emotional abuse, parents who are incarcerated, parents who are exposed to drugs, who just don't have the emotional ability to look after and be a good parent. So my husband experienced many of these things as a child. And what that led to was that as an adult, it caused him to suffer from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, except he didn't know that it was PTSD. That led him to try a lot of therapy to try and get over the pain, but none of it really worked. And then one day, this was about 20 years into his therapy journey, his friend, who was also a victim of childhood trauma, came to him and said, you know, you are really struggling. Nothing seems to be working for you. Why don't you try this specific therapy that I had come across? It was a strange therapy. He had never heard the name before. It's called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And this therapy, when my husband tried it, it changed his life. So within one session, he felt a difference in his emotional control. Within 3 sessions, he could do normal things that he couldn't do. And so when we tell people this story and we tell people how this therapy changed his life and how he then asked himself the question, this works wonders for me, it worked wonders for his friends and other people in the community. Why isn't this more available to everyone who needs it? And so my husband asked himself the question, how can I bring this therapy at an affordable, accessible way to more people? And that led us to create our company. And so that's our founder story. So I would suggest every founder, every leader needs to have a founder story. The other story that I would suggest that all leaders have is a story about who you are as a leader. Because as a leader, what you're trying to tell to persuade your team is, why would you choose to follow me? You have a choice of whoever you can follow in the world, right? Why do you choose to follow me? So having a story that describes who you are as a leader makes it very powerful. And here's one story that I, as a leader, like to tell my new people, especially junior people. And it's a story about Tonya, who was a direct report for me. This was when I was a very young business manager. And this was in the finance. I was the finance director. And one morning, Tonya came to the office and she was very, very distraught. She had been crying. You could see she was not in a good space. And she said, I'm resigning. And I said, what? You are doing so well. You do amazing work. You work so hard. I love working with you. Why are you resigning? And she said, I made a mistake in the spreadsheet yesterday. I said, so why are you resigning? So what had happened was, in the spreadsheet, she had made a very simple error. She forgot to pull down a line, and so a certain number was not added. Unfortunately, what happened was that because she didn't pull down the line, she told us that, hey, if we launch this product, we're going to make a lot of money, right? And so the previous day we had gone to the CEO, we said, we should launch this product, we're going to make lots of money, the numbers support it. But she went home and she realized she didn't pull down the line. And so we were actually going to lose money if you included what she had missed. And so Tonya said, I can't take it. It's too big a responsibility. I told you, and you went in front of the CEO and told the CEO that we should invest. It's my mistake. I have to take responsibility. I want to resign. And I sat her down and I said, Tonya, you are not going to resign, okay? It's my fault. I am the boss. I didn't check it correctly. I will go to the CEO and I will take the blame. It is my fault. It's nothing to do with you. You did the best you could. It was an honest mistake. You learn from that mistake. To me, that's the greater value in that, okay? And that lesson that I want to share with the junior people on my team ever since then is, it's okay to make the first mistake. Whatever mistake you make, the first mistake is okay, right? I will stand behind you as a boss. I will take the blame. We will all learn from it together. But the second mistake, if you make the exact same mistake again, I'm not going to be as forgiving because you didn't learn from it. And so that's something that I share with my people. Say, please come to me. I want to hear the honest truth. No matter how bad, no matter what mistake, tell me. You will not suffer any consequences for that first mistake.
Thanks for sharing. So talking about learning from mistakes, what are some of the mistakes you see even experienced executives and storytellers make?
I won't presume to speak for other experienced storytellers, but I can tell you about the mistakes that I've made and that I've continued to make. So I've studied storytelling for about 4 years, 5 years now. And really, I'm still at the beginning of my journey because I know some people who have been doing it for 40 years. So I'm still making a lot of mistakes. But I can share with you the one that I've learned along the way in the first 4 years of my journey, and that is one about how do you treat your audience with respect. Now, growing up in Singapore and Asian society, we tend to think that if someone stands in front of a room or someone stands on a stage or they have a title of leader or CEO or principal or teacher, some kind of status title, you tell people what to do. You talk down to them. But one thing as a speaker I like to do is to treat the audience with respect and to treat the audience as a peer. And that's why I love stories so much, because stories allow me to just tell what I know and let the audience take what they want from it. And the person I learned this from was actually someone I worked with, and his name was Clayton Christensen. He passed away about 5 years ago. He's famous for his book, The Innovator's Solution and The Innovator's Dilemma. He was a Harvard professor. After he wrote The Innovator's Solution and Innovator's Dilemma, a lot of very smart business people would come to him and would say to him, Clay, how do I apply your principles to my business? And one of these people was Andy Grove of Intel, the CEO of Intel. And he said, my company is very, very successful, but listening to you talk about how successful companies can be disrupted, what should I do, Clay? Now, most people would then say, Andy, you should do 1, you should do 2, you should do 3, and give him a bullet point list, maybe a 100-page PowerPoint deck. That was not Clay's style. Clay said, I don't know your industry, right? I don't know your business. But what I can do is I can tell you a story of something that I know. And so he would tell Andy, a tech CEO, he would tell him the story of the steel business. And he told the story of how mini mills, which were a new innovative kind of steel manufacturing process, disrupted the old style steel business. So Clay told this story of the steel business to a tech CEO. He didn't tell Andy Grove what to think, but Andy Grove took from it a lesson. He could see how it applied. This industry that was so different from his, how the same lesson can apply. Even though that industries were different, the CEOs, they listened to that story and they took the message. And that to me was fundamentally respecting the audience. Respecting the audience that they know their business better than you. So there's no point trying to pretend that you know more than them. But share with them a story and then let them take the message that they want for themselves. So I would say that's a huge lesson that I've learned on my speaking journey. How do I share a story instead of preaching and then letting my audience take what they want out of it?
Thanks for sharing. So just moving gears a bit, what was one story, Adeline, which when you delivered this story, it didn't land? And how did you recover?
Yes. So my first ever speech contest was in 2021, just during the COVID period. First time I was ever took part in a speech contest, and I thought I had the most amazing story. I was going to tell the story of a time when I almost died. I was in a snowmobile in Japan, at the top of a mountain. I was going so fast on the snowmobile, and I was so far ahead of all my friends who were on snowmobiles behind me. And I turned back to look at them, and at that moment, the snowmobile went off the side of the mountain. I flew down about 50 stories down the side of the mountain. It was right at the top, so there were no trees, and I couldn't stop. I couldn't jump off. I thought this was it for me. This is the end. About 50 stories down, hit a bunch of trees, the first row of trees, these little Japanese trees, the V shape. The snowmobile wedged in the middle. I flew off the top of the snowmobile head first to the next line of trees, smashed it on my head. I wasn't wearing a helmet. I fell down. I opened my eyes. Everything was white. And I thought I was in heaven. It was just snow. So I told the story, very entertaining. I loved the story. It was so fun. And in the contest, I came in, out of 5 contestants, I came in 4th out of 5th. Not great. So I was like, what happened? It was a fantastic story. Why didn't it do well? And I was very lucky because the guy who came in first was actually a good friend. And that night I gave him a lift home. And he said to me, I'll tell you why you didn't score well. You didn't score well because you had a great story, but there wasn't a message.
Mm.
And that's a lesson that I took for me. That lesson changed my whole storytelling career. Because what I learned is that a story is like a gift to yourself, right? As I was describing the story being on that mountain in Japan, it was fun. I remember all the fear and the excitement and the happiness when I realized I was still alive and in one piece. It was a great gift to myself. But for my audience, yeah, it's entertaining, but what do they take out of it? So the story needs to have a message. And the message is what the audience takes with them home. So they can use it in some way to apply to their lives so they can change their perspective, they can change their behavior, they can rethink certain beliefs that they've always had. And that to me was the power of it. That there must always be a very strong message, one message that that is the reason why you're telling that story. And I'm so grateful, so grateful that I learned this message early on, 1 year into my journey. So grateful that my friend who won the contest, who was so generous in sharing it with me. And in fact, using that same approach, that's what actually got me to the World Championship of Public Speaking that same year, a few months later.
Great, great. So just to clarify,
Yes.
you start with a message,
Yes.
and of course you also end with a message, right? What happens in between?
So I think of it as a three-stage process. So the first stage is the topic. What is a topic that I can speak about that matters to the audience? And if it's a general audience, so general audience means people who can come from any walk of life, any background, any age, any gender, any what industry, right? A general background. I try and go for values that are human values because that's what connects all of us as humans. So these are things like gratitude, stories about hope, stories about fear. So start with the human value. So that's the first step. The second thing is then the message. So the message, I ask myself a very simple question, which is for this particular topic, what is one lesson that I want to share? And for me now, I'm a mom of two young children. My filter is basically if I had 30 seconds left in the world and I had to give my two young children a lesson about this particular topic. So in the case of gratitude, that message would be it's easy to be grateful for the good things, but true gratitude is when you can find gratefulness in the things that you don't want, right? So that would be a 30-second exercise. And then that is the message I want to give someone that I really care about, which in my case as a parent is my children. So that's the second step. What is this killer message that I must tell? And then the third one is what is the story that best demonstrates this message that I can tell my kids. And what's very nice is the second step, the message, and the third step, the story, are typically very, very connected. Because what I then do is that I then ask myself, what was the time in my life that I really internalized that message, right? The story is the time when that message became so internal to me. So yes, that's my three-step process for coming up with the topic, the message, and then the story.
Okay, thanks for those tips. So moving on, for the benefit of our viewers who are aspiring persuaders, do you have any books or resources to recommend?
Yes. So my first advice is get started. Get started. Storytelling is a skill. So like the good thing is there are very few people who are born storytellers. Everyone, I believe, can be a better storyteller than who you are today. And when you're better, you have the ability to be looked at as a leader, as an influencer, because people who can tell the best stories, like I said, tend to be respected, tend to be very persuasive and get what you want. So there's a lot of benefits to good storytelling. So if I can offer three things that anyone can do, the first thing is Toastmasters. It is a non-profit organization. It's a platform for people to come and practice public speaking. There's probably a Toastmasters club very close to you. Here in Singapore, we have 200 Toastmasters clubs all over the country, and there's I think 30,000 clubs around the world. So there's definitely a club near you. The amazing thing about Toastmasters is not just that you get to practice storytelling, but what I also appreciate is the community. So it's a community of people who want to learn and improve themselves. And every time you can find yourself in a community like that, a growth mindset community, I always say go join it because you will push yourself to be better. So my first thing is join Toastmasters. If there isn't one near you, start a club. If there isn't a Toastmasters, find some other speaking platform that you can use, right? But Toastmasters being a non-profit one is typically very affordable and it's an amazing welcoming community. My second thing is to invest in learning. So there are a lot of great books. Some of my favorite are by this guy called Paul Smith. He has a book called Lead with Stories. So this is about leaders and the stories that leaders need to learn to tell. He has another one called Sell with a Story, and that's for salespeople. How the salespeople use stories to increase their chances of a sale. So Paul Smith, great writer. Another fantastic guy is called Camino Gallo. He wrote a book called Talk Like TED. He shares a lot of the tips of how TEDx speakers put together their speeches so that they can share a message in 15, 17 minutes, right? Very, very powerful messages that reaches millions of people. And then the third tip I would have is to watch good speakers in action. So if you're lucky enough to work in an organization where you have an amazing leader who can tell great stories, watch them, watch how they do it, watch how they use different tips and techniques to persuade. If not, watch TEDx Talks. TEDx Talks on YouTube, lots of them. In some cities, we also have what we call Story Slam or The Moth. And these are storytelling open mic nights where people go up there and tell stories. So lots of opportunities, especially if you live in a big city, where you can experience good storytelling. And if not, there's always internet and YouTube with amazing stories on there.
No, thanks for sharing, Adeline. I'm sure our viewers will find these resources very helpful. As we come towards the end of our show, anything else you would like to add for the benefit of our viewers?
So the one thing I would say is, I'm a mother of two young daughters, and recently I've spent a lot of time thinking about what does AI mean for them? They're about 10 years out from entering the workforce, and it's going to be a completely different world from the world that I entered when I first started work, and even the world that is today, right? So I spent a lot of time thinking about what are the skills that I would like my daughters as well as people of their generation to have that can make them future proof or as future proof as you can against the rise of AI and how it's taking over every part of our life. And that's why I really believe that storytelling is going to be one of the last skills that can be disrupted by machines. Because at its core, storytelling is humans, right? It's not just about technique. It's about that combination of connecting with another human, bringing out emotions with them, how you deliver it, how you persuade them, how you put yourself into the mind of another person. And that is a very critical skill that I believe is one that we all have to learn. It goes way beyond communication. And so I highly believe that everyone should invest the time and effort to think about becoming a better storyteller. Whatever your role in life is, whatever you do, whatever you want to do, I really believe that being able to tell powerful stories can help you get what you want.
Oh, that's a great call to action. AI can tell a story, but only you can relive your story. With that, I thank Adeline for agreeing to come on our podcast. You've been a great guest and sharing very inspirational insights around how to be a great storyteller and a great persuader. Thank you, Adeline.
Thank you so much, Manish, for this opportunity.
Thanks, Adeline, for your powerful insights on storytelling and persuasion. I'm sure our viewers will find these insights very powerful. Thanks a lot for joining us.